I'm going to try and do a bit of a PowerPoint here. That might be a bit small, but I'll speak it through, and then a little bit later on I think we have on the plans, after it gets dark, I might just throw and show a few videos up because they'll be difficult to see now, but a few fun and interesting stuff that I've got there to show you. So today I'd like to really push forward the fact that animals are the link between a lot of things, and our interaction with animals gives us an ability to influence the one constant in life. And well, there are a few things listed as constant in life, aren't there? Death and taxes, but the other one said is change, isn't it? Only constant in life is change, and I think that's pretty true, isn't it? Nothing ever quite stays the same, right? Whenever we talk about anything being in balance, well, if you're a tightrope walker, you know, you're never in balance. Everything's always balancing, so it's always changing, right? And there's our possibility to have some impact on what we do out there. And my background is that I'm from New South Wales, so you'll have to forgive me for that. And I'm fourth generation there on our place. I don't have a decent sized horse paddock compared to you guys. We've got 4,000 acres there on my place, except in times like at the moment where it's a bit drought stricken, and you've probably heard all the whinging from over our side of the country going for a while, but we'd usually have about 1,500 cattle and a couple of thousand sheep through the place. That's not the case at the moment. So grew up on the place there, milked a cow. We used to have stud pigs. I know how to prepare pigs for stud shows. That's not a skill that anybody needs to have anymore, or one I want to return to, I might say. But so had that background, grew up with animals, as many of you guys have, and then I was lucky later in life to get the opportunity to brush up with, if you like, have experience with some land management organisations and that sort of thing. I worked for Landcare for a number of years, and then catchment authorities and all of that sort of thing. So it gave me an opportunity to see things from different angles that I hadn't had the opportunity of before, and it still just reinforced to me that we are the answer to so many things, and it's just sometimes only small changes that can make a difference. But it's got to be from the perspective. It's no good for me, especially from outsider coming here, saying this is what you should do. Nothing that I'm going to say today or tomorrow is going to be a should at you. I'll give you plenty of coulds, right, and give you examples of what other people are doing, but in no way it's not poking anybody in the chest saying you should do this. But we do, all of us, me as well as you guys, have a lot of shoulds coming in from us, and Sally's talk and the other talks this morning reinforcing the fact that there are bigger and bigger expectations from outside, and we might think that's unfair. I probably would agree with that, but that is what is happening. So what are we going to do about that to make that a better result? So I won't do any more on the background. I'll show you a video later on. If you want a bit more background of me, you can read Charlie Massey's book, Call of the Reed Warbler, which a few people, I think you're reading that at the moment. So there's a bit more of a background. But what we're after is thinking of our animals as really as tools. Like they are out here, they're your business reason for doing business, aren't they? Right? But they're a modern megafauna for us to manage the landscape too. Okay? So this is not me just being all furry about big animals out there. It's actually a reason for us to give the wider community, those people down in Melbourne and Sydney and the other big places that don't care too much, a reason for this to all exist out here. You're managing huge swathes of the country, and for some very, very great and important values. And that's really, really important to say how well you're doing it. All right? And you know, change being the constant, but here's an old map. I'm not sure whether you can see too much of that in the light, but I'll just step aside here a little bit so others can see it. But it's a map from the 1920s, and there's the area that says no cattle. You're in an area that says some cattle. There's very few cattle in other places, and the funny old, lovely old map. But so that's a 1920s look at Australia if you want to understand the beef industry. It wouldn't be our blueprint for going forward, would it? It's not relevant. But yet I'd suggest to you, and this is not an attack on anybody here or any individual anywhere else in our industry, but a lot of our attitudes are still in the 1920s or maybe before as well, about how we handle animals, how we go about stuff, right? So that's not a criticism, that's just an observation, right? So we wouldn't go and guide our future by using that map. And likewise, right, we wouldn't go and say, right, well, Grandpa or Grandma did it one way and I'm going to keep on doing it that way. There will be some very, very good things that Grandma and Grandpa did, and that we should learn and use those, absolutely. But you wouldn't use the maps they were using, would you, to guide your way forward, right? So change is always happening and always going to come along. So what's the deal when you're faced with anything like that is actually we're going to use the change to benefit ourselves. That's what you really want from the situation. So here's a picture of an angry guy and driving a car, and if you can't read the writing here, I've got a question for all of you that I'd like you to answer, but I don't want you to tell me out loud or put your hands up at all. Just have the answer in your mind. The question to you all is, are you an above average or a below average driver? Okay? You don't have to tell anybody, but just hold that answer for a moment. Okay? Are you above average or below average with your driving skills? Okay? All right, so the average is, of course, half must be above and half must be below. Yeah? That's an average, isn't it? When Aussies get polled, 75% of Australians say they're above average drivers. Just a little bit of a problem there, isn't it? Really? And you think hard about that? So I don't care what you answered in your mind, but it's just a reflection of, how good are we, right? The worst judge of Bruce Maynard's driving is, of course, here. Of course, right? I'm the worst judge. I get feedback about, did I miss the corner or did I run off the road or whatever, or run into somebody. There's a certain amount of crash feedback there. But whether I'm doing a good job of taking corners or driving that vehicle or that other one, you guys could make a good assessment if you watch me, say how good or bad, whether I'm above or below average. But I'm one of the worst ones, in fact, the worst person to make that judgment. That makes sense? So there's the difficulty when every one of us walks out working with animals. How good are we on that day, and how good are we in general? Okay, that's not me saying you're above or below average. I'm not taking any assumption there at all. But of course, it's very, very difficult to be outside your person and have a good look. That's why we have sports coaches. Yeah? It's a physical thing we're doing as well as a mental thing of understanding what do we want to do over there in the yards, right? So your performance, right, can always be brushed up if you take the attitude to doing that. I think in the tennis game at the moment, when we watch Nick Kyrgios and all his shenanigans in the tennis, and him saying, yeah, I probably should get a coach. Yep, I think you probably should get a psychologist as well. But he's not doing a very good job of taking himself to the next level. Outlandish talent, isn't he? And we all know and feel when we see him behaving like a goose, saying, gosh, with some extra help and guidance and just some self-reflection, you could be right at the top. Okay? So, in our industry, I think there's been so much work over the years, quite rightly, on breeding and feeding. But we, as an industry, we haven't had a lot of work or thought about reading the animals, right? Our interactions with them, okay? In general, that's been the part, as an industry-wide, where we've been not bringing up the speed. And for a lot of reasons, we're going to be forced to, but also it's in our best interest to get better at that, because a heck of a lot of the gains of breeding and feeding, right, have been made. We still need to want to keep on working on those. Don't ever stop, right? We're not there yet. We're never there yet with any of that. But on the big part, where we can make massive increases, that's where we can start to give some thought. So at any time when we're looking at an animal here or anywhere, there's three parts to what they're doing with us right now. Of course, it's their genetic package and their history. What happened to them 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago, right? That's part of what they're doing. But the third biggest part is, what are we and the surroundings doing to them at that moment, okay? Would you agree that's a reasonable chunking together of why that animal's doing that stuff? Genetics, history, and what's happening about it, okay? Obviously, in the moment, there's only one thing you can do something about, isn't it? The thing that's right in front of you, which brings it back to, okay, got an animal behaving in a way that I do not wish it to be, right? What am I going to do about that? I could play the blame game and say, right, well, it's because it's that breed, you know, they're mongrels or whatever, or because it's cattle, or because it's sheep, or whatever your if you like, your further previous beliefs are. But that's a bit of a get out clause, because we're putting the blame on them, okay? And quite rightly, they're showing behaviours that might have been triggered 5 years ago. Nothing to do with your fault today. It's not about fault, is it? But what are we going to do about it today, right now, to get the result we want? That's the real thought they're carrying forward, because all the time that drives you to just better and better performance. If always you have the attitude, right, well, this is going pear-shaped in front of me at the moment, I'm not just going to do that harder, I'm going to try something different. But it actually is a conscious thought for a moment, isn't it? Because all of us have got a lot of memories working with stock. If something's not working and I'm walking this way and it's not working, I'm liable to keep on doing it that way, right, for quite a period of time, instead of having conscious thought, no, the animals are showing me that's not appropriate, I will do something different, anything, right? But that's the logical thing. But of course, we're all emotional beings, and of course it's near the end of the day and everything's been going okay through the day, but the last few are getting difficult, blah blah, right? Okay, and of course, what have I built up there? Can you see that even I'm acting out with my, oh geez, you know, it's the end of the bloody day and the last punch over there, they won't go through. Even my body language is giving away, isn't it? That I'm really got frustrated and I'm not handling this group the same way as I was the other 90%, right? Understandably, I'm tired at the end of the day. So all of this keeps on swimming around all the time. Of at any moment that we're impacting on the animals, there's things happening, okay? And this unfortunately this slide doesn't come up too well in here, but I'll briefly describe it. There's been 4 levels of livestock management come along in about the last 35, 40 years. So starting with Temple Grandin. So a number of you would have heard of Temple Grandin, yeah, seeing some heads, right? For those of you that don't, she's a lady, partly autistic lady, who's done a heck of a lot for that cause in the US. But she's done a hell of a lot of work over the years in the US on yard designs and that sort of thing. Right? So when you go to modern abattoirs and big facilities and that sort of thing, very, very often you'll see, oh yes, that's a Temple Grandin inspired design, right? Mightn't have actually been done by her, but you can tell that's where the handiwork has come, her early work there. And she was a real pioneer on that, of even just sort of wakening up our industries to the fact that, well, animal welfare is an important thing and continues to be for business as well as for the broader needs. So level 1. Level 2 came along with Bud Williams. Now, any of you, probably the younger ones of you, probably didn't see him when he came out, but he first was brought out in 1999 to Australia. So he was the originator of the low stress stock handling techniques, right? Really big parting of the curtains for me. Yep, I went and saw him. Whole new world. Yep, great lift up, and we'll be forever thankful of Bud coming along. I don't think he liked humans very much, but he certainly did like animals, and gave us the opportunity to go and do a lot more. And working with did some work with Bud in the US, and then a fair bit more work with a group over in Utah State University who were looking at all sorts of behaviour and dietary mixing of animals. And it was over there at that time that we gradually progressed on to third level, so stress-free. Now, this is something I encounter throughout Australia. You know, people come up and say, "Oh, so you're doing the low stress breaths?" No, no, we're working on level 3 and 4 now, and I'm not trying to be pedantic or just make a marketing pitch or anything like that. It's not about that. There was a number of things that Bud got us to, but with that, our understanding has progressed well past that now, right? And to get some of these other more high-level results, you've got to aspire to go to that further level, okay? That's not to say if you're at level 2 and happy there and staying happy there, that's just fine, right? There's no stress, and once again, I'm not saying you should, right? But just you need to know that it's there. And then out of that has come the 4th level, which is the booklets here, the self-herding booklets. And some went out on the tables here, and there's a box because Sally and a few others asked for if there's a few more copies. So there should be a few more copies of that floating about. So Dean Revell and I have been working on that in WA, which is really great to say. This state has been leading the nation and has been leading the world actually in these techniques, which is really quite exciting. Us old Aussies can do some stuff at times. We get all sort of bashful. It always needs some celebrity or somebody from outside. But no, we can do it, and there's where it gets a really lot of fun. And I enjoyed John's talk just before mine, because where I see it is there's so many positives to make sure that we keep the chains going. It's so important, right? That keeps on going. But I think of, well, how right from birth out here on the station, for that animal's life, we can put in reinforcements that when the animal arrives on the port there, what does it get to see? Something that it's familiar with. What does it get to see on the boat on the trip over? Something that it's familiar with, right? And if that sounds like a big leap, just think about it like a McDonald's sign, right? If you've grown up somewhere and it's part of your landscape and it means something positive or even just reassuring, right? And you take that into other places, right? You start to affect the animal's behaviour, right? Making a change on performance as well. So some points there about that behaviours can either cycle up positively, or you can drive them down the other way. And the easiest way to think about this is, okay, if you're training a dog or something like that, you've got a new pup. When you're first teaching it to sit, you might grab a few dog biscuits or treats or something, mightn't you? And give it lots of reassurance when you tell it sit, right? Don't you? You give it lots of pats and lots of love and all the rest of that. As it gradually gets the deal of sitting, when you say sit, right, it gets less rewards, doesn't it? Okay? Doesn't get the food rewards for too long, soon gets a pat on the head. Once it's got it properly, the old dog only gets a pat once or twice a year for sitting, doesn't it? Doesn't need much reinforcement, okay? That's right at the heart of behaviours anywhere, right? If we get a behaviour fixed, we don't need to reinforce it very often. So in the book there's all sorts of different ways that you can use self-herding, and sometimes the first assumption people make, oh, you're just putting lollies out in the landscape and that's all you're doing. Yeah, you could do that, but that's going to be expensive and impractical. What do we have to initiate is actually behaviours, using lollies occasionally, just like training that dog to sit. Now you're starting to get the picture here. Once we've got something as a set as a behaviour, we've only got to reinforce it with a familiar sign, just like the McDonald's is for the kids as they driving down the road. You know, have you ever wondered why they often have the Macca's signs high on a post? It's because the sight line of the kids can see the Macca's sign. It's not about the adults, of course. They're not really trying to get you. The pester power of the kids is good. And of course, they're setting a pattern, aren't they, with that for life. So a little bit more about going to a stress-free level, and to explain this out, So this is just saying you've got a normal state along here. Happy, calm animal, person, doesn't matter. Person, dog, kangaroo, doesn't matter. And then a stress happens. Whatever happens, crap happens. All right? A stress happens, and then you return back to normal. How long is this curve, right, of returning back to normal? It lasts a long time or a short time, depending upon, right, how much practice you've had, doesn't it? So if somebody were to go and say something insulting to any one of you guys, right, your individual reactions will be different, won't they? They won't all be the same. Some people just shrug it off and say, oh, they're an idiot, right? If somebody works at a bar or something like that, they get used to a lot of awful things said, don't they? What are they getting? They're actually getting a practice to return back to normal, aren't they? Right? So when we're doing exercises in a stress-free, it's actually giving the animals plenty of practice of returning back to normal fast, right? Okay? And we want to give them consistent messages that way, because the one thing that is most stressful for any animals is inconsistency. The Melbourne Uni did some interesting work on that, where they basically decided they were going to treat one group of animals very gently and one very roughly, and they had a middle group. The middle group didn't know whether they were going to get treated roughly or gently. So out of the three groups, which do you think was the most stressed? The middle. Yep, because you didn't know. So that kept a heightened rate of anxiety up, much higher than just getting treated roughly every time. You knew that was being consistent. So that sort of thing, and that's what our animals crave from us at all times too. When we're in the yards, whatever you're doing, the more consistent you can be, the more reassuring that is, however you're attempting things, right? Because that becomes predictable, right? That becomes predictable for the animals, and then they have more chance of saying, oh, okay, I don't like what Bruce is doing, but it's okay. It's okay. It's being let off. But the thing that any animals don't want is a low level of stress. Low levels of stress equal chronic stress. It's what we're seeing in our modern societies a lot from a lot of people in a lot of jobs, right? A lot of high levels of stress nowadays, and you say, right, well, we're more comfortable than ever, and we've got all the whiz-bang gadgets and all the rest of that jazz, but there's still a chronic level of stress because it's not getting relieved, is it? You know, one of the best things for people to relieve, especially if you're in an office job or something, go out and have a walk, go and have a run, do anything physical, right? Okay. So these things are embedded and you kind of know them from your own practical sort of things. Some things in your life that would have worried you more and stuck with you more than other things. We've all got those, right? We need practice in resilience. That's what the fancy word for being able to get over things and get back to normal. Resilience, isn't it? Whatever the knock comes in the future, we want our animals not just to be dead dodos that don't react to you when you put pressure on. That's no bloody help for us at all. But we do want them to move, yep, when we put pressure on, but then to go about their business. Okay. Comments or questions at that point? Am I okay? Going on?
Is just the thing I'm sort of coming back to at the moment is saying that it's stress-free not kind of misleading, and that you're still teaching them how to take stress?
We're teaching them how to regain back to stress-free. If you wanted to term it something, a return to normal, please, not a low level carry on, because that's all about performance. That's about sickness and performance, or I shouldn't say sickness because that would be too bland. The tendency to fall sick, in the same way that if I'm tired and run down and it's flu season, then I can almost feel myself falling into that, and I'm sure you have that same sort of thing. We're just tilting the scales. We want to tilt them to strength. It doesn't mean that suddenly, totally, miraculously, cured of yeah, that's right. Stresses happen. And the word for it in the behavioural thing is stressors they use, because that's the thing. So, the most stressful thing that you can do for a sheep is shearing, but not for the usual reason that we think about all the cuts and the actual manhandling, being turned upside down. One set of research there where they gave the sheep a choice of electric shock or being turned upside down, but just turned upside down, not shorn, just turned upside down. They would rather pick the electric shock, thanks very much, than being turned upside down. So when you think about those sort of things, it starts to untangle that pain and fear are exactly the same thing. You can have a fear of pain, absolutely, yep, but it's all your responses long term are about the fear of a negative consequence coming again. So it comes into all of this field, which is the still emerging field of epigenetics. So and it's way beyond my pay grade to give you a good description of the science of that. We've got some great brains here from the veterinary side of things. They'll be able to give you a much better, but in my little thumbnail guide here, epigenetics is just visualising the switches on top of your genes, right? Not like on-off switches, but more like dimmer switches, right? So as we travel through life, we're subject to everything that happens around us. Everything we eat, everything that happens to us as a stress, everything good that happens to us, it all affects our epigenome, okay? So when we're working with the animals here, we've got the genes, we've got the environment, which is a fancy word for saying what's happening about right here, right now, and then what we are doing, or what is, or what the dogs are chasing them down in the paddock or whatever, the rest that's happening about. And this has some big implications as we go forward. And once again, a little bit hard for you to see, but picture of a lady with a baby inside, but also, so we're assuming this is a female fetus, right? One that's forming, the reproductive cells are forming, aren't they? Right? So when you're a lady and you're born with all the eggs you're going to have. When we're doing something to our livestock, right, okay, in regard to stress, it washes through every cell of that body, right? And if they're pregnant, we're affecting 3 generations, right? That doesn't mean to say that, oh right, well you give something a hard time once and you've wrecked 3 generations, they're all going to be mad. It doesn't work that way, because it's switches on top of the genes, right? The genetic pool keeps on going and adapting. So once again, back to the only constant is change in life, isn't it? Right? Species happen and divert from one another because of the influences on them, and this is one example. So really, really strong. If we are doing something with young heifers, and they're going to be the ones that you're keeping for 10 years or something, the ones, right? I think there's a great case to be made. Wow, we can put a little bit more work in there because it's going to pay back in the future for a long period of time. Going to be an imprint on top of there. But don't forget about the boys. And this is one little bit of research to demonstrate epigenetic effects. And so you can hardly see it, there's a mouse in there. What they did was they had 3 generations of mice, and male mice, all boys, right? And they bred them down. The first generation, what they did was pair an electric shock with a smell. So every time the smell went into the cage, the wire grate on holding the mouse got an electric shock, right? So you only need to do that a few times, and then when you put the smell in, right, the mouse tenses up, yep, because it's getting ready for the pain to come. Make sense? Same as any command that we give for a dog or a horse, okay? What they did then was they bred down 2 generations. The next generation did not get shown the electric shock nor the smell. On the 3rd generation, the grandson, right, put the smell in the cage, the grandson's tense up. Great example of an epigenetic signal on the genes, right? Okay, so really quite profound when you think about this, right? once again, don't misconstrue this, that you only do one thing in your life, right, and it gets imprinted forever. What if you bred those mouse generations and kept on breeding and there was never the smell and never the electric shock? That fades away, doesn't it? Because it's behaviours. Behaviours can be reinforced or they can be let to fade away, right? Okay, so the boys and the girls are important, right, when we're handling them. And this overlays everything else. So many of the talks this morning I've really enjoyed, and thinking about health stuff and supplementation and those sort of things, and the knowledge as it's coming along with all of those topics. Behaviour can be a magnifier or something that drives it back the other way. Right? How you offer things can be almost as important as what you're offering. Okay, so I've got some bits of video there. I will have to show them tonight because that's not showing up. But the top one here is sheep eating weeds. There's 3 different types of thistles. Here is cattle eating serrated tussock, and the bottom one is pastoral cattle eating bardy bush down at down off Exmouth. So 3 different examples of animals choosing to eat weeds. Now that's a really big point, and where this whole channel's going. We want our animals to do stuff, whether it be getting processed through here, but also, even more importantly, what are they doing out there? That's really where the production is, isn't it? We've got jobs to do here of whatever we've got to do with them, right? That's part of the business thing, right? But it isn't the business, is it? Putting maximum number of kilos on the trucks essentially is the business, isn't it? So production out there is what we really want to be influencing. What we do in here still can have a big influence out there if animals are still holding a stress, right? Okay, keeps on taking them and affecting them. So with all of these weed eating examples of work that we've done, those animals chose to eat the weeds. I was not forcing them to eat the weeds. Really important. Big assumption when you talk about that's made, and it's a quite reasonable one for people. First of all, oh, you're getting the animals to eat weeds, so you're forcing them to do it, are you? That's not very effective at all. It'd be about as effective as if you guys didn't like Brussels sprouts and say, right, this is the way to get you eat Brussels sprouts. For weeks on end, we're going to give you plates full of Brussels sprouts and just a little bit of other stuff. It'll put you off for life. Yep. So that makes sense, doesn't it? We don't overdo it. You wouldn't do it that way. If your mum wanted you to start getting used to to eating Brussels sprouts and experimenting with Brussels sprouts, she starts to hide a leaf or 2 in the mashed potato, doesn't she, or something like that, right? First of all, or leaving you little bits to work into the whole diet. Okay, so pretty profound stuff when you can think about doing that sort of stuff. But you guys can. A very important thing that I always put up and want to make sure that people understand. No guru Bruce, no guru anybody in this. Everything that I do, you guys can do better. And that's, if you like, my mission in life, just like a good footy coach or something. It's not to be known as the best player, but to be able to help people to express the abilities that they've got, right? And to allow the animals to express what they've got in them. Because just because you have the experience now, quite rightly, of saying, yeah, I sort of know what they eat in this part of the station, and over here they don't, and everything. Once again, that isn't fixed. That isn't constant. We can start to change that. And a lot of the self-herding work that we've been doing has been aimed just at that. So we're doing some work in Northern Territory at the moment. It was on the ABC Rural Report the other day, if you want to look it up. But we've got GPS satellite tags on the cows, and tracking and changing their behaviours over a large paddock. So you can change, once you start changing behaviours, you start changing everything. Right? Everything changes. So it's the opportunity for you to think about getting some of the advantages that folks like myself have in the little farms of getting subdivisions and that sort of thing, of getting better grazing results, but without having to go to the trouble and the expense of putting those sort of things in. We start to move the animals around, getting them to do that by choice. So ending off here, this is a little slide, and once again beyond my pay grade, but I think it's important. So this is the average Australian temperature. So this is the collection from 1910 to 2010 of the average Australian temperatures across the whole continent. And no, I'm not going to get into any debates or whatever on temperatures, but only to say obviously there's a trend here. But my slide was put in there is the temperature is heating up for all of us, me included, right? Not just from the bloody climate, it's from the community as well, right? There are two things that I can't control, right? But we can help to guide things that we're doing to make a better perception of that. And one of the biggest things that I'd say is that of anywhere in the nation, the biggest climate heroes provably have been up here. In 2010, the biggest effect that Australia's ever shown in reduction of carbon emissions was in 2010. The northern savannas accrued huge amounts of carbon. Plenty has gone back out the other way in time, but there's your story for the people in Melbourne and that sort of thing, right? You're actually the people that help saving all of us Easterners, right? Big positive there for you. But it's intertwined with, okay, how are we handling the animals? How are we handling the landscape? If we handle them the same way that we were in the 1920s map, that's not going to be perceived well, and all the science would indicate that's not going to do anything terribly grand for our carbon issues. So it's an opportunity for us to get a win-win-win, and that's why I put that on the earlier slide, from actually what is perceived as weaknesses in some quarters, the outside community, animal welfare and landscape issues. You can actually drive it to be your greatest strength. And I thank you very much for this short address. What I'm going to do this evening is show some videos, and we'll also do a little brief description of how and what we're going to do on the course and that sort of thing. Comments or questions? I think I'm going. How am I going on time? Good. Questions or comments?
Can you talk a bit about genetics? If you've got animals that are feral for all intents, I've got some Dorper sheep, and I had nice ones and they were lovely and quiet and I managed them really well. I bought some new ones and they are bastards, and I pay and fed them every day, and I could never change their behaviour. They just, and the ram I was putting over them was a very quiet ram, but that offspring was still bloody feral bastards. How long does that take to come through, and is it possible to change that behaviour in those type of animals? You're talking a lot about epigenetics, or is that, how many generations do you expect for that sort of behaviour to come out?
Yep, I think you can start today, but and without being at all personal or critical. Please don't want to sound it. Whatever you're doing, and if it's not working at the moment, what do you think you might go back and amend or change or whatever?
Yeah, well, I've since done low stress handling course as well, and I think that would be fantastic help. But for animals that were hand fed every single day, I still couldn't knock the out of them.
Yep.
And I see a lot of what you're talking about is offering that reward. But
Well, rewards are just a tool. They're nothing more than that, and that's a really important point you bring up, because if you think I'm self-herding, I do not. If I own a station here, I do not want to be paying for lollies to go around the landscape. What I do want to do is train them up to clear signals, and then I can take those cheap signals around the landscape. And only occasionally do the animals ever see a reward. And even it's just the offering of a reward which gets that real magnetism. It's our other analogy we use is we're actually making a poker machine out there. It's occasional jackpots, right? There's no coincidence at all that a poker machine gives you lots of zeros, doesn't it? It doesn't give you a little reward back every time, does it? Because in fact behaviour is driven stronger by zeros as well as appropriate enough reinforcing with the promise of a big jackpot, please. That's the strongest behavioural things that we can influence. So in terms of changing animals, yes, because we've done plenty of stuff with clean skins, right, to show that their change happens very rapidly. So if I can give you a different example to say, because I often get asked, how fast can we see a change in animals? How fast do we see a change in animals that have been cut scrub in a drought, but they've never ever seen it before? So these are new animals in an area. They've never had scrub cut. Of course, first day when you start up the chainsaw, they're running away from that sound, isn't it? Dreadful, dreadful sound. That could hardly be a worse sound. But of course, within a few days, isn't it? You start brr, brr, and you start hearing the moose in the distance, right? They've keyed off that so strongly, and that's a dietary reward when they really want it, isn't it? So if you like, the magnetism of that reward is pretty strong because they're very hungry in a drought time. But that's how little it can be. And so with clean skin bulls and that sort of thing, I was telling Joe a story on the way out there the other night from an example where we had a trap camera near a trap yards, and the owner said, going through the about 3,000 photos, and he said, "That effing bull, I know that bastard." And I said, "What's the story with him?" And he said, "He's a bloody clean skin. Every year for the last 3 years we've had him in the trap yards. When we turn up to do the stock work, he clears the rails. He doesn't even clip them on the way out. And I know he's still in the area because every so often I'll see the dust or see his back end as he goes into the scrub." He changed that animal in 5 days with self-herding techniques. But the big thing to be able to put out to you, it wasn't about, like you were training a Brumby horse or something where you have to put in a lot of effort. He got the majority to affect the individual, right? So by putting in a certain attractants there at the trap yard and changing that up and making that movable poker machine, right? The majority changed that animal. And so 5 days later, he called me and he said, "Right, I've just been out to that water there. I was 20 metres away from that bull, and in the ute, and he was just standing there looking at me." But the majority had changed the bull, right? That's your advantage that you have in your animal behaviour work, rather than if we were talking about just training dolphins or individual animals. You've got the group dynamics, right, to help change behaviours. So that's what came along. Oh, and by the way, when they did the trapping, he set the bull on the truck. Yeah, it went this time. So there, and let's give a cost basis for that. Let's call it that. So this is 3.5-4 years ago, so it's maybe $1,000 for the bull, call it that. Well, what he put out in lollies and effort was probably maximum a couple of hours of effort and maybe $50 worth of stuff. Good payoff, and that was just what happened on that animal. So animals can change fast, and they show us those examples a lot, which is very encouraging and exciting. You'll see a lot of change in the animals tomorrow, right? Even though we've got Hessian there behind and everything, right? Their sense of smell and sound is very, very acute, isn't it? Right? So the Hessian isn't preventing a lot of that. So as the teams keep on doing stuff, right? Even though there's not the visual thing there for the next groups, the following groups of animals, right, will already be keyed in to some of what they need to expect. Huh? Yep.
Can you just run through what Spud's doing at Kidman Springs and what they've found so far and how he's actually done it?
Right. Okay. Yep. Okay. Good question. And I might tonight on the I'll pull up a couple of slides to show where the tracking's showing. So the question was about Kidman Springs is the station in the Northern Territory. It's 3.5 hours from Katherine, isn't it? And, yep. And 2.5 from Kununurra, is it? Yep. And so they've been doing self-herding work there with a group of Brahman young heifers, aren't they? Yeah, they're heifers. And they're just moving them about. So tonight we'll show you some pictures of where they've been starting to go and You didn't get to the paddock, did you, the other day? When no, when I went out to see the paddock where the attractant station was, they'd impacted in there because what they were trying to do was get the animals to go up and use some of the old black spear grass in that area. So the impact is quite clear, and I'll pop up a couple of photos of that tonight. But also, it was right on the boundary fence. The other animals, the next door neighbours' animals, were also impacting in that area. So when you start to change behaviours, right, you magnetise the whole area. It's like putting a heavy ball in a blanket. It's like a gravity effect. Things start to happen if they're keying off. So yep, they're moving them around in that paddock, and probably I can do a better description on the board. But moving them about the landscape with low-level attractants is what they're doing on Kidman Springs. Fantastic. Thank you very much.